Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar, Autism Misinformation on TikTok, Causes and Possible Remedies. My name is Dr. Celine Saulnier, and I'm on the board of directors of the Atlanta Autism Consortium. The Atlanta Autism Consortium is a nonprofit organization dedicated to creating collaborating conversations throughout the metro Atlanta autism community and beyond. We host free programs just like this on a wide variety of topics every month, and we're so glad that you've joined us tonight. Before we get started, I have just a few brief housekeeping notes. Please know that as an attendee, your microphone and camera will be muted, but you can ask any questions you have throughout the program in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. Additionally, we'll be emailing you the contact information for our panelists to the email address that you used to register for this program, so you can contact them directly with any other questions you might have. So now it's my absolute honor to present our speakers tonight. These are my colleagues from Drexel University. Dr. Giacomo Vivanti is an associate professor and the leader of early detection and intervention at the A.J. Drexel Autism Institute. I had the pleasure of working with Giacomo decades ago at the Yale Child Study Center when he came over just as a student from Italy and was learning about autism research before he became a now world-renowned clinician scientist. And then we have Dr. Elisabeth Sheridan, who is also an associate professor, and she's the clinical core director of the A.J. Drexel Autism Institute. And again, I've had the pleasure of working with Elisabeth. She has been in Atlanta twice. She trained here at the Marcus Autism Center, then went off to get her degree, and then came back as a postdoc at the Marcus Autism Center in Emory University before she became faculty up in New York and now at Drexel. And finally, we have Diego Aragon-Guevara. And Diego was an undergrad at Drexel when he conducted this research. And now he's currently obtaining his doctorate in clinical psychology at Binghamton University in New York. Diego was the first author of the article that we're discussing tonight that came out a few months ago, titled The Reach and Accuracy of Information on Autism on TikTok. So the AAC is proud to welcome you all, and I will kick it over to you.
Thank you, Celine. This is a tremendous privilege to be able to present our research and to exchange some ideas about a topic that I know many of us are grappling with. So this is not a lecture; is an opportunity to exchange ideas. I'm going to share my screen, and then Elisabeth is gonna start our conversation.
Excellent. Thanks, Giacomo. I can see it perfectly. It's such an honor to be here. I echo Giacomo's sentiments. Celine, thanks for inviting us into the Atlanta Autism Consortium. We're thrilled to share with you today this paper that we wrote, but also a bigger context and thinking more about what is going on social media in the context of misinformation, and what do we need to do as clinicians and researchers interfacing with folks on the spectrum to navigate all of that information. So you'll see on the next slide our study team. So we have 3/4 of our team here today. So Diego will pick up in a moment. As we mentioned, is our first author. Grace Castle was also an undergraduate when this paper was this project was completed. She is now getting her master's in public health at Drexel University, which is exciting. And then, of course, you heard about me and Giacomo. None of us have any disclosures related to this project to share with you all today. So why this project? Why is this something we're excited about? And did we pursue this line of research? So Giacomo and I've laughed with Giacomo actually about the fact that when Diego and Grace first approached me about this idea, I was pretty reticent to want to do research on social media because it's such a huge construct and it's so dynamic and ever changing. And to be very honest, I don't even have the TikTok app. I'd heard a lot from my patients and families over the years about what was happening on TikTok, but I personally don't engage with that social media platform. But I had seen many of these type of headlines. So these headlines have all come out in the last year or so. The idea that people are turning to social media for medical information, Munchausen by internet. So just beyond even autism, it's a lot of mental health conditions, and thinking about how folks are consuming media and the immediacy with which we can share information these days and immediately have it uploaded. So I think, this had the headline there from CNN that parents are alarmed. I've had many patients, my background as a child psychologist, I've worked with families for years in diagnostic contexts, and I think they've come to us and said, what are we doing? How are we filtering social media? What does this mean? So that really led to this project, and we're excited to share some of that science with you today.
I am also someone without any background on TikTok in particular, and when Diego approached me with the idea of doing research on TikTok in relation to autism, my first question was, what is TikTok exactly? But as we started doing research on this area, we realized that the conversation needs to be contextualized in the broader context of why misinformation about autism is prominent in social media platforms and on the internet in general. And what is specific about the format of social media, and what is specific about the context of autism? So thinking about the causes for misinformation, one important thing to realize is that when creators upload content, videos, they might seek and ultimately experience social attention by sharing information that is going to impress their community, regardless of the accuracy of such information. The accuracy, whether what you're posting is accurate or not, is not specifically reinforced, it's not punished, there's no consequence really in spreading misinformation. The sensationalism is rewarded, meaning you will get more attention if what you're creating is more sensationalist. And there's a cost of verifying whether your information is accurate or not. It takes time, and it interferes with what Elisabeth was saying, the opportunity to spread content immediately and quickly, or jump on a debate at the right time. So there are a lot of costs with identifying whether what you're posting is accurate, and not a lot of benefits. So that's one component. Another component is that you might want to upload or create or share content that is perhaps not accurate, because you want to signal your affiliation with a specific community. You want to join the club. If you want to be someone who, for example, is against vaccines, you might be welcomed in the club of those who don't trust vaccines by uploading some content that you that has that specific information. So that is more about, this is designed to get you to increase your own status within that online community. Now you have a more status because you signaled your appartenance in that particular club, so to say, or online community. There's also content that is more obviously designed to get some instrumental or financial gains. So, for example, promoting a product. This new marijuana product is going to cure autism, or discrediting some established interventions or established practices so that you can promote your own version of it, which was the original work that was done in the old discredited connection between autism and vaccines. It was designed to ultimately promote an alternative version of vaccines. That's one example. there's also the notion or the possibility that the format of social media, and Diego will tell you what the format of TikTok is, but generally speaking, the format might be conducive to statements that will be always unnuanced or not detailed enough to reach the level of accuracy that we will need or that is will be desirable. And so when we make cautious statements, those statements are typically longer and more boring than the kind of statements that are that the format is more conducive to use within many social media, including TikTok. And then there's also a context to social media, which is you don't just share information for the benefit of information sharing. There is a context of a polarizing and antagonistic and combative style that is rewarded, that is encouraged, that is expected. And so you're more likely, you'll be more encouraged to post content that fits within this sort of polarization. Now, having said that, there's also a context to the autism field. Why is it that there is more misinformation in the autism field in particular? And part of it is not TikTok's fault, or it's not any social media's fault, but it's the reality that we have important gaps in scientific evidence. We continue to have gaps, which means we are not able to give all the answers that we will want to give to individuals who are searching for information and knowledge that will be relevant to them. We're also guilty of underrepresentation of specific groups. So when people feel disenfranchised, not represented in research, they will try to find answers in other places. There's a history of animosity and polarization within the autism field. If you work in intervention like myself, you might see that some of the style of discrediting an intervention, for example, that was not designed by you or that you were not trained on is part of the discourse in, at least historically, in the field of autism. Also, the scientific community made very obvious mistakes that will justify people finding it an unreliable source to a certain degree. So the example of vaccines that I mentioned before, the connection which is now discredited again between autism and vaccines was originally based on an article that was not, it was not a TikTok video, it was an article that was actually published on The Lancet, which is an important scientific journal. So that means within the system, there was an initial inability to detect misinformation, which obviously created mistrust towards scientific information in general. And that's one example. And another component is the idea that the scientific community can come across as being slow and concerned with and not concerned enough with action and knowledge that can change people's lives in the immediate. So all of this context is the sort of perfect, is a context in which misinformation is more likely to be encouraged than to be discouraged, which is the reason why we decided to, based on Diego's original knowledge of what TikTok is and interest in autism content within that platform, we looked at that particular platform. Now, I'm not going to ask how many of you are TikTok users. It probably depends on the demographics more than anything else. But generally speaking, the most important thing about TikTok is that it's extremely popular. 2 billion mobile downloads by 2020, most popular website in 2021. It has a short video format. We cannot upload this conversation that we're having now, for example, on TikTok. The content is mostly unfiltered. There is some kind of filtering. but typically not for the kind of things that we're talking about, the accuracy of scientific information. It's mostly unfiltered. And it was designed for entertainment rather than dissemination of scientific information. So it ended up being used for, by creators to disseminate healthcare information, like other social media platform, but that was not what it was designed for to start with. So it became a source of information despite the intent of the original developers of the form. So why is autism something that we will be interested in relation to TikTok? Because it was the 9th most viewed health-related hashtag on TikTok as of 2021. These numbers might be even larger now. There was no specific indication that content related to autism was regulated in any way, and there was no research on it. There is currently a little bit of research on top of the data that we're presenting now, but it was uncharted territory when we started looking at that. So we were interested in a couple of things. One is the actual use of inaccurate, or the actual dissemination of inaccurate information through videos that are uploaded on TikTok. For example, videos claiming that a certain product will cure autism, or do you want to know if you're autistic? Just take this simple test and you will find out if you're autistic. That kind of content, which is easy if you are an educated viewer to identify as suspicious. And that's one way you can bias views of autism, these kind of alternative facts to use, or fake news if you want, but information that is not true. The other area that we were interested in is the overgeneralization phenomenon. And this is content in which individual experiences related to someone who is on the autism spectrum or identify themselves as being on the autism spectrum are used to describe or to characterize or to provide recommendations or indications for the entire autism spectrum population. So, I don't know, my child hated to be hugged when she was a baby. If your infant is doing the same, she has autism. That kind of content where you have a statement that refers maybe to a reality that someone is experiencing, and then that personal experience is taken to the next step, which is, and therefore, based on my experience, I have indications or recommendations or a reality or a truth that I want to share with you, because it involves everybody who is on the autism spectrum. So, Diego, if you want to take it from here, we'll tell you what we found.
Sure. Thank you, Giacomo. In order to investigate these concerns and questions we had regarding the autism content on TikTok, we created a new TikTok account in order to avoid any bias in the video recommendation algorithm that a previous account would cause. And then from there, we looked through the hashtag autism hashtag. And videos under the hashtag are roughly displayed based on the engagement criteria, so how many likes and views a video receives, with the most popular videos appearing at the top of the search. So our initial set of exclusion criteria were non-English videos, videos not related to autism, or duplicate videos. So once we applied this to the videos under the hashtag, that left us with about 365 videos, the top viewed 365 videos. And from there, we wanted to examine the informational videos in the sample, which we operationally defined as videos advancing claims on autism in general, including what causes it and how autism should be diagnosed or treated. And we wanted to be very careful to separate this from personal experience, which there were a lot of personal experience videos, which we defined as videos designed to share personal experiences, which do not include statements related to autism in general. So for example, a parent talking about her experience with her autistic child at Disneyland, or an autistic individual reporting about her specific sensory supports would go under the umbrella of personal experience. We just wanted to capture the informational content that is more broad and general. So once we coded for specifically informational videos, we ended up with 133 videos, which we then characterized in terms of accuracy, creator type, and engagement indicators, so likes and views. And this led to our coding process, where myself and Grace, the other co-author on this paper, collected the data, collected the likes and views at the time of coding, and we also looked at whether what the creator status was. And we got this information from the creators themselves based on the information they gave, whether that was in the videos or in their bios. And finally, we coded the videos as either accurate, inaccurate, or overgeneralization. An example of an accurate video would be a video saying that many autistic children can benefit from using alternative and augmentative communication. An example of an inaccurate video is saying that you can determine if you are autistic by using this very simple, quick and easy 3-question test. There is no such test. There is no scientific basis for such test. So that would be very quickly characterized as inaccurate. And finally, overgeneralization, as Giacomo touched on, was an example of this is saying autistic children hate to play with sand, which might be the case for certain individuals, but you cannot generalize such statements to the population as a whole. And we established our intercoder reliability. That was about 80%. And we resolved discrepancies with a secondary review led by Giacomo, who was the study leader. And so our results, we found that at the time of coding, the autism hashtag on TikTok had 11.5 billion views. This was as of July 2022. I checked this morning, and the hashtag has about 30 billion views now. So that can give you all an indication of just how rapidly this is growing. And the informational videos in our sample accounted for about 200 million views. So very comprehensive. About 73% of the content that in our sample was coded inaccurate or overgeneralized. So again, this is about 150 million views that was coded either inaccurate or overgeneralized. So very large amount of information, and the reach of these videos is quite tremendous. Another important point is that inaccurate and overgeneralized information was liked and viewed as frequently as accurate information. So this kind of shows that the viewers can't or don't seem to be able to differentiate inaccurate from accurate content, or if they are, it is not represented in the distribution of views. And finally, we found that videos posted by healthcare providers were more likely to be accurate. However, as I'm sure you all can imagine, these videos were far and few between. So here's a breakdown of the video classification, with 41% being classified as inaccurate, 32% being classified as overgeneralization, and 27% being accurate. And here you can see our breakdown by creator type. So you can see that there was a lot of the overgeneralized and inaccurate content comes from people that are not autistic creators and are non-healthcare practitioners. So these are just everyday people going on TikTok to present information about autism as factual. So this is a very big concern. So to summarize, the informational content about autism made available on TikTok is tremendous in terms of its impact. It reaches a very wide number of people. To reiterate, the total hashtag had about 11.5 billion views. This was during July of 2022. It is now October 2023, and this is about 30 billion. So this is an ongoing issue, and the reach is tremendous. And most of the information is misaligned with current knowledge. So again, very concerning. And accurate information and misleading information coexist on TikTok with similar perceived levels of authority. Again, they receive on average about the same amount of views and likes.
Okay, so how do we get out of this situation? The premise here, before I go over these talking points, is that generally speaking, beyond the field of autism, it doesn't seem like as a society we figured out how to regulate social media content. We all agree that when you have this kind of reach, you have an enormous potential for social media to be used to reach individuals who we're not good at reaching using other channels, and to disseminate helpful information. At the same time, I don't think anybody has figured out how to channel information that is not misleading, or to regulate, or to create the right balance between avoiding that the only way to disseminate information is peer-reviewed papers on academic journals that are obviously designed to reach a certain population, and basically not engaging with users, including TikTok users and social media users who do need information in many cases, and factual information. But there are some steps that we can take. First of all, it's important as an academic. I am probably biased, and I have to be aware that my inclination is to express contempt towards a TikTok user who is learning from a TikTok video and not from my peer-reviewed papers that are as boring as you can imagine they will be on journals that even have a paywall. So the steps that you need to understand what I'm writing and to even pay for that content is such that it makes it absolutely obvious that most people do not have access to that information. So that contempt is absolutely out of place. And also in terms of content, we need to think about, are we providing the answers that individuals need? If individuals are looking for answers on TikTok, is also because we as a scientific community or practitioners community often don't communicate in a way that seems to be responsive to what people are experiencing and their needs. So we need better science to inform better practice that fills the gap. If people perceive that there is a vacuum, they're going to look for expertise, they're going to look for answers in places that seem to provide confident answers. Also, at times we do have good answers, but we're not very good at disseminating those answers, right? So our reliable and fact-checked information is packaged in a way that is typically difficult to understand, or we project so much caution in each thing that we say that we will lose the competition with someone who is instead very confident. So it's the complexity of the format that we're using, and academia as a culture. We use specific language that might not that doesn't stand a chance compared to the immediate emotional engagement that you might get from a video that comes from someone who's talking about their life experience and has powerful imagery and very emotionally engaging content to share. So we need to think about how do we disseminate reliable and fact-checked information in a way that is engaging enough to a broader audience. We can also help individuals and families to navigate sources of information. Again, a little bit of, I guess, presumption here that we are able to disentangle everything that is reliable and everything that is not reliable. But generally speaking, we can agree that the NIH website, for example, or other trusted sources can be confidently indicated to families and individuals as a source that they can trust based on the processes of peer review and attention to every statement that goes there. We also need to help we need to help clinicians and practitioners in the field too, navigating sources of information. I was recently at a seminar where someone we invited, who is an academic, suggested to find information on autism on the internet, and someone who is an academic and is also autistic reiterated, find us on the internet. And I found that to be one example of potentially misleading indication, where a lot of individuals on the autism spectrum are not on the internet, do not know how to use the internet, and you should try to engage with them and find them in the services, including residential services, for example, for adults on the autism spectrum, and places other than the internet. What is represented in the internet is part of a very vocal population who might not be provide a comprehensive representation, especially of those who are more in need for intensive services. And many argues, I myself believe that any conversation that affects services provision should be centered around those who need services, who need intensive services. It's also important to understand the implications of different kinds of knowledge. That means that a lot of videos that describe personal experiences provide helpful knowledge. It's important. You will learn a lot about, from that video, you will learn a lot about that personal experience, not about autism in general. The information that that people can provide, for example, I have two brothers who are autistic. I can talk about them and say things that are factual and true, but of little relevance to the population, the autistic population in general, unless I specify what is meant to be describing my experience and what is meant to be describing knowledge that we have about autism. So it's important to educate people that listening to that content can be instructional, but is separate from learning from data that comes from anything that is not anecdotal evidence or evidence that comes from hypothesis testing and the scientific and that is based on the scientific method, basically. It's important to acknowledge context and validating concerns that people have, particularly if someone is, if there is a context of I am not receiving any services that meet my needs, or my child is not receiving services that meet their needs, and they had a negative experience with those services. So I'm concerned about how much I can trust the establishment, so to say, and I just saw on TikTok about this and that. If someone is communicating with you about that, it's important to, first of all, validate the fact that, yes, if there were services that meet the needs of individuals on the autism spectrum, there will be less need to search for answers elsewhere. So it's very important to validate that concern while also highlighting the content-specific issues, meaning I'm not telling you just because you went on TikTok, you did something wrong. I'm telling you the specific thing that you learned from TikTok might be relevant or not relevant based on the specific needs of the child we're talking about. And also the importance of acknowledging that there are different populations, different stakeholders in the autism community, and we scientific community and practice and autism practitioners, we need to avoid reinforcing and perpetuating overgeneralization. We tend to do that as well, to base our conclusions on our research, and then when we're looking at our research, we realize that our research only involves certain populations within the autism spectrum. When we do that, we are also engaging in the same sort of overgeneralization risk. We also need to have awareness of the content that is in that is shared on TikTok. It's not sufficient to have scientific knowledge if you don't know what people are talking about when in their autism conversations outside of the narrow field of people who are professionals in the field. Particularly content that might pose barriers to trust, communication, and shared decision-making between professionals and autistic individuals and their families. You know, that started before TikTok. People hearing from other people don't trust the experts. They don't tell you this and that. And this is the alternative to that establishment expertise. It's important to know what the content of those conversations are, so that you're ready to engage in those conversations. And awareness of the dangers of TikTok should not overshadow the awareness of the positive sides of TikTok. I received many emails after this paper was published from individuals who say, you know, being on TikTok for me is like receiving a big hug. I feel part of a community. We can share ideas. We can feel that we're connected. So even what I called before anecdotal reports, those videos anecdotally documenting the lives of autistic people and their families and do not claim to disseminate knowledge on autism in general. They're very important. They have the potential to reduce stigma. They can inform about lived experiences. An informed viewer can learn a lot about it. And so there is no reason to discourage that kind of use of social media in general. It's when you go from, this is my experience, to let me tell you what to do to you know, cure you or cure autism in your children or diagnose autism in your children, or things that you should do. Because we autistics or we anti-vaxxers or we any sort of indication that you are part of someone who is has something that will be generalizable to you. Again, I want to make the point, information that is presented with the goal of sharing personal experiences is what was missing for a very long time in the radar of individuals who are doing research on autism, not listening to the lived experiences of people. So it's imperative that we do that, and that we hear, again, the concerns that led people to go from learning from that experience to taking some action based on the assumption that that experience will generalize to them. So it's very important to say, again, to reiterate that TikTok does offer a content space where autistic individuals and family members like myself can share their personal experiences and criticisms about sharing experiences within online platforms. It's in itself divisive. So we need to draw that important line. And this is news that Diego shared only this morning, I think. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so when I was looking for the updated figure of the amount of views under the hashtag, I found that the latest sort of addition by TikTok is that they have, when you search autism in the TikTok search bar, you get a sort of disclaimer about autism information and how the sort of information that you get on TikTok might not be as accurate and as informative as videos or as information in other sources, basically. So you can see this link that if you click, it takes you to the National Institute of Mental Health website on autism, and it encourages people to kind of look for other sources of information regarding autism. And this is the case I checked for things like ADHD, OCD, other mental health conditions. So this is a new addition, and it is kind of a promising step in the right direction from TikTok.
Yeah, and before discussing further about the implication, this is one. When we think about remedies, we also need to think about the responsibilities of those who create those platforms and continue to think about the actions that they can take despite their reluctancy to take any action. Elisabeth, take it from here.
Great. Thank you both. So we want to spend this final portion with you all before we have a question and answer part of our talk, just to think about, Giacomo just walked us through beautifully so many possible remedies and things that we could actually do. But I think this paper and line of research resonated with me and many of my colleagues who are clinicians on the front line seeing families and doing research in this space, because we've heard anecdotally from our patients and the parents of our patients that there are both sides of the experience. As Giacomo just said, sometimes it can be very positive. It can be, I see myself in this video. I have the same shared experience as this parent whose child also has a meltdown every time we get to the grocery store aisle. That makes me have community in this space, which is a really lovely thing. The flip side of that coin, though, is headlines like this in Newsweek with some folks who do have autism feeling as though the videos about autism are really trivializing their condition, or the phenomena of, self-diagnosis, that it's somehow changing their identity as someone who's had this autism diagnosis. So I think it's just really important for us to sit with that and to think about that and to listen to the people we work with, our autistic patients, family members, friends, and just hear from them kind of what their experience is in order to help them navigate the platform. Additionally, thinking about, Giacomo already hit on this, but we want to touch on it one more time, and who is on social media and who is not. So many of the folks who are most profoundly affected by intellectual disabilities or language impairments, they are not on these platforms, and they are not sharing their lived experiences in the same way that some folks who can engage with these platforms are. So that's just another really important thing for us to think about. We do know, I personally have several friends who have children who cannot have their own phone or speak for themselves or ever be left unattended, that the parent actually is the one who uses social media for connection to find other caregivers and other parents to relate with those experiences, which they've shared as helpful. A second thing here that we want to think about is how self-referrals are affected by this. Those of us who do diagnostic evaluations saw an uptick in the last decade, certainly, of folks that are not just on TikTok, on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, everywhere that folks can share information. They're seeing themselves in these videos sometimes and making a diagnosis. Sometimes, as Diego mentioned, walking through the videos, there are TikTokers out there saying, well, just answer this 2-question test or this 5-question test, and you too can know if you're autistic. So sometimes folks will take those tests and say, oh, wow, I didn't know. And that's really alarming. And I think that can affect someone's journey in a major way. I was actually recently on a panel that the title of it was 2 Sides of the Same Coin, Disability Identity in the Age of Social Media. And I found it really interesting. There was an expert on the panel who studies disability identity. And I think we just need to be really mindful and listening and thinking about how folks identify with something versus the world in which we diagnosticians are living, which is a DSM-ICD world, where the words like disorder, dysfunction, impairment are essential to qualifying for an autism spectrum disorder that opens doors to then services. And so whenever I work with adults in the context of evaluations, one of the most important things I think is to sit down before you even start an evaluation and talk with them about, what does this mean to you? Because often if you're coming in and saying, I see myself in this diagnosis, and then we as the clinician don't agree or don't make that diagnosis, it can lead to a pretty uncomfortable feedback session. So I think saying at the front of the evaluation, this is our process and this is the medical model in which we operate. We need to think about that together, because I personally will never tell someone how they identify in any way. So if someone says to me, I feel as though I am on the spectrum and I see myself in all these aspects of autism, that's fine. And at the same time, though, if they come to me, I can only give a diagnosis when I have the correct documentation to make that call. So I think that's something we are thinking a lot about as clinicians, especially. On the next slide, we'll see the idea that another implication is again, this headline was someone that, in the vein that I just shared, why I'm more ambivalent about my diagnosis, is feeling as though, that they're getting lost in the shuffle of this. Yes, there's more awareness, but what does it mean to be on the spectrum? And I think in general, Giacomo alluded to this, we also have to be very mindful of how the narrative is reflecting who needs what services. And the idea that if you're a senator or a congressperson and, you look at the videos and you see the difference between folks who are able to advocate for themselves and to talk about their opinions and thoughts and feelings about autism, we're needing to remember the folks who aren't there and who have those higher support needs. So we really do need to think a lot more about that. I know there are definitely some diagnosticians in the room and psychologists, so I want to share one takeaway I learned from this project is related to this anti-establishment discourse or kind of gatekeeping issue. Even though I don't have TikTok myself, Grace and Diego did pull up the videos and we watched many of them together when we were talking about their coding of the videos. And then I also went back and looked at almost all of them that they coded for the paper more recently. And there are videos on there that are sharing information about our diagnostic processes. So those of you, I'm a trainer on some of the tools we use to diagnose autism. So the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, or ADOS, Autism Diagnostic Interview, and there are folks going on TikTok talking about their experience in those evaluations, sometimes misrepresenting what the tool is intended to do. For example, one person shared, this psychologist is gatekeeping a diagnosis. They just told me I don't have autism. How on earth are they going to know if I have autism based on having me read a book that's about flying frogs? So, that's a book that's part of the ADOS called Tuesday, right? So that's one element of a larger context. So I just think it's important that we know that's happening, right? So I personally had never gone and looked carefully at the hashtag of autism, but now I think more carefully when I work with adults and adolescents in particular, saying to them, what do you know about autism? Where do you think you are? Like, where are you in your process? I think is just important for us to think about. and to be really humble and to approach our diagnostic evaluations with humility, that we don't always know the exact right answer. Sometimes, especially with adult evaluations, it is so nuanced and complicated. And so we do the best we can with the information we gather. So I just think we need to be mindful and careful to not reinforce stereotypes of gatekeeping and really do our best to open access and to make folks comfortable during evaluations. And then finally, I think this headline caught my eye recently. Not only I lived in Finland for a while, so I have an affinity for the Finns, but I also think this headline really spoke to me from a place of systematically, how are we thinking about especially children and adolescents who their prefrontal cortex is still very much being developed, even into your early 20s. Judgment decision making. How are you supposed to look at all these videos and access to information that's inundated everywhere and decide what's real and what's not, and how do I fact check something? And so Finland's really leading the way and trying to teach kids in elementary school how to really think carefully about these issues. And I know, our educational system, I think we need to be really mindful of the effect that social media is having on kids more broadly, not just in the context of the hashtag autism, but more broadly. We think about, the power of the social media being unmatched, but it's also so unregulated. So how are we navigating and helping kids in particular, and parents of these young children and adolescents, kind of think about how we control some of this? We know that adolescence is a time of identity exploration, and that social connectedness in adolescence is so important for mental health. So there's something really lovely about being able to have these different ways that you can connect now. I actually have an autistic family member in middle school, and one of his favorite things to do is to be on FaceTime with another autistic friend and watching YouTube videos, or, they have a lovely way to connect with one another socially because of technology. So I think that's a great example of how it can be helpful. But I think also just being mindful that we need to, filter that and think about the fact that the American Academy of Pediatrics shared with us that in a report a couple of years ago, teens are spending on average 9 hours on their phones a day, and 2/3 of teens have a device of some sort. So these are things, again, we just need to be mindful of. And then finally, just the reach of social media. Giacomo and Diego hinted at this already. There was such a small percentage of healthcare providers actually included in the sample who were providing information that was just more broadly providing any information, and they were more likely to be accurate. I personally know, my social media use is almost always for personal reasons. I don't go on and talk about autism on the other social media platforms I have, and that's a personal intentional choice. There are some really good researchers and clinicians out there who are in the quote unquote influencer space who are trying to share good information. So how can we as a healthcare provider network and folks who are trying to support autistic people and their families provide more accurate content that's going to get to them more quickly? And then finally, we also, in the context, we're going to, I know, address some questions from the audience here momentarily, but just to close out, we did want to share with you all, we did 2 different podcasts where we talked in a lot more detail about the elements of this paper. We covered some things tonight that we talked about in both of these, but if you're really interested in the research elements of this or want to hear more about the paper, both the Autism Science Foundation podcast and the Behavioral Observations podcast are linked here. And we're really grateful for you all having us today. So thank you. And I think we can stop sharing our slides to allow for some conversation now.
Thank you so much. This is overwhelming to me. It's such important information, but I've learned so much. I'm trying to digest it all. I've learned more about TikTok tonight than the 5 years that my teenagers have been on the site. When you were talking about the professionals and the small percentage of professionals that are actually out there providing information, I went to APA this summer, the American Psychological Association's conference, and I attended an ethics webinar that was 3 hours long on social media in broader mental health. it was Twitch, which I've never heard of. I think that's it, and TikTok and some others. And they were talking about professionals going on and actually doing podcasts and things, just these little brief, earshots of different mental health conditions. And they mentioned one in particular on ADHD that was actually by an influencer and not a clinician. And these were clinicians saying that this is one of the ones that they endorsed. And that struck me because I said, well, wait a minute, this is not a clinician presenting the information on ADHD. And they're like, it's okay because it's pre-recorded. So if anyone had questions, because I'm thinking, well, how are they going to answer questions about the disorder if they don't know anything about it? They're just an influencer. And they were just like, oh, it's okay because it's pre-recorded. And that just didn't sit well with me. But this is what's out there.
It really is. And it's alarming. And I think I will say there's, I think it's called the Parenting Translator. It's a psychologist and former researcher who takes research articles and digests them and puts them in very quick, like one-line summaries on Instagram. And many of my friends with kids have actually gone to this child psychologist. She trained at UNC as well. And she is really reaching people in a way that what Giacomo was saying, these long, boring papers that can take a year to write, a year to get published. How do we actually get that in the hands of the parents who want to know what the results mean? So I think that is one example, but Celine, I'm right there with you. It's so alarming what's happening and how unregulated some of these things are from an ethical perspective.
And it's really just all unregulated, right? We don't even have organizations like APA doing anything to monitor the information on mental health, or the other APA, American Psychiatric Association, for that matter, doing anything to regulate the content that's out there.
I also want to add that I think part of the issue, right, is that the nature of TikTok is such that it's a short format video, right? So these videos are often 1 minute, 3 minutes, but very short, meaning a lot of the nuance that kind of in academia that we deal with when we talk about these issues is lost because it's so difficult, right, to capture that nuance in a minute, right? So things have to be very quick, very to the point, and presented as factual rather than, well, this is one possible theory, and these are the things supporting it. And these are the things that, the limitations, if you will. The limitations are often cut out, which removes so much of the nuance that we in academia are used to.
And I think we as clinicians also have to take into account the backlash that can happen when we do go on social media to promote accurate information, because there are people out there, let's just say, to throw out the vaccine, Giacomo, you're talking about vaccines. That's so highly controversial that once I start talking about how vaccines don't cause autism, there's no research to support that, then all of a sudden I can get death threats and whether or not people would actually act upon those threats. Now I'm wondering whether or not, as a clinician, I want to even do this anymore. So that happens a lot as well. Marie is asking in the chat, the webinar is informative. Will there be future webinars on autism? So the Atlanta Autism Consortium, all of our webinars are autism related. And so if you go on our website, let me see if I can put in the chat here, I'm putting the link to the Atlanta Autism Consortium, our website, and there, if you're interested in becoming a member, there's the membership page, but certainly signing up for our listserv and you'll find out about all upcoming webinars. I'm actually surprised that there aren't more comments in the chat, because I've seen you all give similar lectures on other platforms, and this is a very highly engaging topic, and usually there's a lot. to say. So I am happy to continue asking questions, but I want to make sure other people have an opportunity to.
And Celine, I just want to make sure, I know Diego addressed a little bit of Keely's question about how can researchers look at leveraging this type of platform to disseminate, which is really hard. And as you said, 2 minutes to get that information out. But I don't know if you wanted to maybe talk a little bit further about, her question is, for many reasons, this would be difficult and might not be effective. What are your thoughts about trying to use TikTok to intentionally distribute evidence-based information?
I will say another one of the difficulties, right, kind of inherent in our approach versus everyone else on TikTok is that we, as clinicians, as, researchers, want to make sure the statements that we put out are fact-checked, right, are supported by research. So the creation of a TikTok from an account that Keely is describing would take, days, weeks to prepare, right, to carefully research, to present, to put into a format that is easily understood. It would probably take multiple levels of review, right? This process is very detailed because we are clinicians, we are researchers, and we need to be detailed. Versus the average person, right, could just pick up their phone and then 1 minute later, right, there's a TikTok out there. So it's the sheer volume, right, that it's very difficult for us to replicate. I think is one of the things that makes it very difficult to try to have something like that.
And there are some people out there. I know a colleague of mine, Dr. Sam Goldstein in Salt Lake. He's in private practice. He has a TikTok account that has over 1 million views per some of his videos. So he'll pick a very explicit topic point, like the eye tracking paper that came out from Ami Klin and Warren Jones out of the Marcus Autism Center this month, and just say, here's what is the latest in eye tracking research. And like you were saying, just condense it in a little soundbite. But it's hard to do, to take something that dense and put it into lay terms.
And I will add that if you are if you're doing research, if you're in a research environment, you're unlikely to be encouraged to do that in terms of your performance review or any output that is relevant to the people who need to evaluate whether what you're doing is sufficient to achieve a promotion or something like that. So it will have to be something that you do on top of everything else that you would normally be asked to do.
Absolutely. There is a comment by Marie in here saying, in our state, we have a mandated reporting requirement when an autism diagnosis is made by a healthcare provider. What are your thoughts on the ethics of this, especially when individuals receiving information on social media and requesting such evaluations? We have many clinicians who are wary of doing these evaluations because of this mandated reporting.
Just rereading that, we have a mandated reporting requirement when an autism diagnosis is not made by a healthcare provider? Like someone's doing it unethically? Is that because if it's made by a healthcare provider, why would that be a problem?
That's what I was wondering as well. Mandated reporting about what? Marie, if you can clarify that would be great.
I will say, while we're waiting for that clarification, I do know many clinicians who are very wary of doing these evaluations just more broadly for some of the reasons that Celine mentioned already about kind of if the answer is not what the person wants, feeling like there could be an attack. I've had some folks I know talk about like being yelled at in feedbacks, and it certainly is, it's not, you need to have expertise, and I think it's not to be taken lightly, and just to say, oh, I'm just going to add this to my repertoire of things I offer on my website.
Right. And I know those of you who are working and diagnosing with adults, you're likely familiar with this, and especially you, Elisabeth, that when adults come in for an evaluation, they likely already have that preconceived notion wherever they found out the information on autism, that I have autism or I think I have autism. And it strikes me how many times when I don't diagnose autism, whether it's social anxiety or ADHD or something else that overlaps with the symptoms, that they get very upset. And I think that's a reality check for me as a clinician coming from the childhood world, where parents are usually upset when you give the diagnosis of autism, and now it's the tables have turned and the pendulum has swung that the person is looking for that label. So I have to reiterate that the label is still given when the symptoms are disabling across contexts in life, and I'm not going to give that label if those particular symptoms are not disabling. And if your symptoms are characteristic of something else, then the treatment, really we're catering this to the treatment and intervention. It's going to be different. And so I wouldn't ethically want to send you in that direction, but it can be really challenging, like you said.
There's also
go
ahead.
Oh, Marie just clarified, we are mandated to report ASD diagnoses to the state. Interesting.
That is interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that's not here in Georgia.
No, yeah. Oh, so the weariness folks have around then folks seeing things on social media and coming in because of that. Interesting. Yeah, I that's the first I've heard. From the provider standpoint, there are concerns because we fill out significant amounts of information about the individual and their family members on an we are concerned about how this could be used. That is interesting. I don't know.
And I'm in private practice, and I always say that I'm not affiliated with any medical record. So any diagnosis that I provide is just for you and information for you to share with whomever you need to. So it doesn't go into any record. But for example, if I were still at the Marcus Autism Center, then it is in a medical record.
Yeah.
There's a comment in the chat, in the panelists chat, that I wanted to comment on because I think it's very enlightening. The comment is, I have seen a few videos about people self-diagnosing themselves on TikTok. I've seen the comments, people are agreeing, and people will blindly label themselves of a short video on social media. And the need for clearing the stereotypes and thought connected to the autistic community, and the complexity of hearing people easily pick up the term autism from non-healthcare providers, if you are actually autistic, or if you have family members who are autistic. And one thing that I think this is very insightful. We often talk about the feeling of the disconnection that you feel when you don't make sense of maybe characteristics that you have, and then you understand, oh, this is autism. But there is less talk about the disconnection that you feel when you actually have someone who you love who is autistic, and you hear everybody else using that word suddenly in a way that has little connection with that experience of someone you know. So part of it is obviously the heterogeneity, the variability. That's why we have this big issue with overgeneralization. It's very easy to overgeneralize. The other component is that things have changed in a way that now autism is an identity that is available for people. It was not available when I was young as a way to describe or to make sense of feelings that I had. And because autism is about the social domain, and the social domain is complex to navigate, and because people feel lonely and disconnected in general, that is one way that you can look at, or one direction you can look at in the effort to make sense of what you're experiencing, even if what you're experiencing might be genuine disconnection from your friends or from the society. that is due not to a biologically determined cause, but by the structure of our society that creates that existentialist feeling that I don't feel like I'm like everybody else. I feel like everybody else are socially successful and I am not. That's another thing that social media do, is to disseminate the false belief that everybody else is socially successful except for you. And so that can perpetuate a cycle where you're looking for an answer to why you're not having the same experiences as everybody else socially, and then an answer is also given to you. And sometimes it might be that this is leading to a factual path of, yes, I now recognize those symptoms. It's what people call autism, and it can also be the opposite, that what you are experiencing is the loneliness or something that is common human experience, which is still painful. Human experience is painful, but that you're using that label to in a way that is not the way we intend when we're talking about autism.
Very true. Are there any other questions, comments from our attendees? We had a really large group tonight, so we're very thankful. We know this is information that everyone was interested in hearing about. And just to give more information for attendees who are newer to the Atlanta Autism Consortium, we have monthly webinars or in-person discussions. We sort of did the shift during COVID, but we have upcoming topics that will range from things like SSI and funding issues for individuals across the lifespan, for families, and disparities in autism and intervention and things like that. So just follow us either on social media. We are on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram, or on the website. And then did someone else?
It looked like Molly had her hand raised, so I was telling them they could put it into the chat. Or let's see, Sarah has a quick question.
Oh, was this study about autism specifically, or did it also include neurodiversity? That's a great question.
The hashtag, Diego, that you looked at.
Yes, we looked at the hashtag autism hashtag. There is a hashtag neurodiversity hashtag, but in terms of the actual content and information, we saw a lot of overlap, right? These terms kind of being used somewhat interchangeably, people talking about autism in the context of neurodiversity and vice versa. But we primarily looked at the autism specific content as opposed to ADHD, or other things. So yes, neurodiversity in the context of autism.
I do think, Susan, to your point, that could be a whole nother study, and a whole nother study on personal experiences.
And I saw
Diego,
something.
are you going to do it?
I was just going to say, I don't know that
next?
that's going to be Diego's dissertation, but I do know a dear colleague, Vanessa's student, she's doing this as her dissertation, looking at autism on TikTok. So I think there are students out there that are going to figure out a lot more than we had time to do in just a brief report like this. So someone in the chat said to be continued, and I think that is very true. We're just starting to scratch the surface on all the work that needs to be done here.
Yeah, just adding on to that, well, my interest is more in the adult quality of life realm than in the TikTok realm. Something to note is that for personal experience, right, I say these numbers, it was 11.5 billion under the hashtag, but our sample was only around 200 million. That a lot of the videos are personal experience, right? The personal experience videos accrue a lot of views, a lot of likes. Yeah. I think because the nature of these videos they tend to be more positive, kind of heartwarming stories that reduce stigma and have a lot of positive right connotations to them. So I think a more qualitative study examining these personal experiences would be really interesting. And yeah, it would be something that really would be cool to see.
That's such a good point, Diego. It reminds me, actually, I forgot to share. I often will share just a brief anecdote about one of my favorite patients ever, because I remember at the start of her evaluation, she was a 17-year-old young woman who saw herself in a video on TikTok. Actually, she saw characteristics of how she was, her, like a lot of her traits and things. She had been diagnosed with anxiety and ADHD throughout her childhood at different times, and kind of really struggled socially. So seeing that video actually sparked her to ask her parents for an evaluation. So she wasn't going around and saying, I'm autistic, but rather, wait a minute, could this make more sense for me than the ADHD and anxiety, or is it part of this whole picture? And I did a full, thorough eval with her, and doing the diagnostic interview with her parents, it could not have been any more crystal clear. Autism in her 3, 4, 5-year-old age range. And here she is at 17, very clearly autistic. I did not need to do an ADOS or any in-depth to come to that conclusion, but she's navigated most of her life thinking she just doesn't fit in, and she can't quite figure out why that is. And she thought it was her anxiety. She thought it was her ADHD. And then once we had this understanding of her autism, the relief she had, we did a couple different feedbacks, and the final feedback that was just her, she brought this collage. She had gone into these magazines and like cut out all of these things that define how her brain worked. Essentially, she drew her head and like made a collage to give to me to thank me for helping unlock her brain, and for her to understand how she viewed the world differently. So I think that's a really nice example of the power of social media leading to an evidence-based evaluation. And it was heartwarming. And that's when I was like, what's happening on the TikTok? Like, this was 5 or 6 years ago now, but it's just a nice example that sometimes it really can be meaningful for folks.
Without a doubt. That is such a great story. All right, then I think unless there are last minute jumping in questions, we can wrap it up for tonight. I cannot thank you three enough. This is just phenomenal. And for, sharing with our Atlanta region, this important work is just fantastic. And I know for a fact that there are people on tonight's program that were from out of state. So the fact that we were able to do this virtually is amazing.
Thanks so much for having us. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for attending. And on behalf of the Atlanta Autism Consortium, have a wonderful night.